Our next speaker will be Daniel Gold. They have 4 years as a graphics software engineer in the AAA space. Daniel brings technical expertise and a love of experimentation to his work, gained through building rendering systems, optimizing performance, and tackling tough bugs across platforms. Alongside his professional work, he enjoys prototyping gameplay systems and exploring where math, code, and game feel intersect. So with that, I'll let you take it away, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. So like Daniel said, I am Daniel. I've been making games for professionally for about 4 years, but as a rendering engineer, so I focus on optimization and rendering systems, engine systems, and everything adjacent to that, and optimizing gameplay systems closer to shipping. But today we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about how you can use math smartly to improve the feel of your games. So today we're going to be covering two things, really. One is designing your movement and jump in a platformer game, moving away from, say, manually tweaking forces on things like rigid bodies and applying manually adjusting velocities, and deriving some equations so we can adjust the values that we care about, and moving to things that would be easier to adjust, easier to maintain. And then I'll do a small demo for that. And then after that, I have a small demo on camera movement and how we can move away from frame rate dependent functions for camera following, and then how to improve your screen shake. So I feel like everyone who's worked on a platformer game at some point has gone through this, where you set up some velocities and physics values, some masses, and you go and you play and like it feels okay, and then you go and you tweak it and you're like, okay, it feels better. I jump off the ground and it feels good, but the landing feels weird, or the player feels, taking off feels good, but going down feels floaty, and then you adjust the gravity and now you can't jump as high. And then you go through this cycle over and over and over until you find something that feels all right. And then you go and start designing your levels. But then, you run into a problem where you're designing the way you designed the level, it won't quite work. And then you have to start adjusting these values again. And then the rest of your level design doesn't work anymore. And then, rinse and repeat. So how can we move away from this? How can we do better? Let's think about the things we actually care about. What are the values we want to set when we're platforming? So we want to be able to tell how high we can jump, how far away we can jump, how fast we can move, how long does it take to hit the peak of the jump. These are the kind of things you want to adjust. We don't care about forces and masses and that. We don't want to be touching those if we don't have to. We'd rather have those derived. So let's reframe this to see what we can do and come to this outcome. So in order to define our jump, with our inputs being, say, how high we can jump, how far we can jump, and how fast the player can move, we need to rearrange some physics equations so that we can enter these values and it'll spit out the velocities that we need. So first thing we're going to focus on is jumping. Say the player needs to take off when you take off of the ground, you need to have an initial velocity to send you into the air. So let's find out. So using these values of max jump height and distance and how the ground speed of the player will say, how can we find these values? So for the y velocity, the jump, we will use the equation for velocity over time with constant acceleration gravity. So we have v of t is equal to g of t plus or v of t is equal to gravity times time plus the initial velocity. And we know that at our jump peak, the y velocity will be equal to 0. We won't be going any higher after that. So if we sub that in, we find that our initial velocity will be negative gravity times the time we hit the peak of the jump at. Well, that's great. We know what our initial velocity will be, but we don't know what our gravity needs to be yet. We haven't defined that yet. So what we can do now is go ahead and calculate that. So we know two things already. We know TP, the time of the peak of the jump, and we also know our initial velocity, which is negative gravity times time at the peak of the jump. Ooh, sorry. Here we are. I was on the wrong slide. There we go. So now we need to find gravity. So to find gravity, we need a couple other values. We need h, height h, the peak height of the jump. And for our case, we're going to assume initial position is 0. It can be whatever you want, really, because it would just be 0 plus height. So the equation for position over time with constant acceleration is half gravity times time squared plus initial velocity times time plus initial position. We know already that the peak jump time, TP, is when we want to be at our height h. So we can substitute in this equation. We already have the initial velocity, which is negative gravity times the time at the peak of the jump. So we substitute it in, and we get gravity is equal to -2 times the height times the time it takes to get to the peak of the height squared. So we have that here now. And it's kind of nice because if you look at this, we just have these values here that we can change this max jump height, max jump distance, and right now time to peak jump. And then we can get the initial velocity and the gravity. And we just have to apply those as we normally would in a game. So when you jump, you just set the y velocity to the initial jump velocity, and then you apply gravity every frame, and it'll just work out nicely for you. So far, going along with this, we have had the time to peak jump, how long it takes to get to the top of the jump. That's been a controllable value. But that's not really the case. That's not really how these work. That was just for simplicity. What will really happen is the time to get to the peak of the jump will be the time it takes to go half the horizontal distance across. If you think about it, right, you say you're jumping 5 units across. Well, the peak of the jump, if it's right in the middle, if it's the same gravity going up and down, it'll be at halfway through, or 2.5. So our time to the peak of the jump is the half of the distance divided by the horizontal velocity. So we can now add this to our structure here. So we have the max jump height, the max jump distance, and then the player movement speed. And that's all we need to adjust. This time to peak jump is used to calculate the initial velocity and the gravity, but that is also derived. I have a note here saying that we multiply it by half because that assumes the very midpoint of the jump is where you're going to reach the peak. So that's pretty nice. You can define your player's movement now fully with just how far you want to jump, how high you want to jump, and how fast you can move. So we can do a couple more things with this, though, to improve how the jump feels and add a little more polish to it, because this is quite simple. So one small thing is to add player acceleration. Most games have this. Players don't hit the maximum velocity immediately when they start moving. So instead, we go ahead and add a ground acceleration value. And that just takes the movement speed and we divide it by a time to the maximum speed. So again, this is where we don't want to be, applying forces and velocities directly. Instead of messing around with that, we define it as the time it takes to reach your maximum velocity instead of tuning an acceleration value itself. And this is just a small change. And it's nice when you expose this to designers, because this makes a lot more sense than them having to do, physics to figure out how things need to feel. One other thing we can do that's very common in games is fast falling. So once the player reaches the peak of the jump, we want to increase gravity. It's very famous that this is done in Mario. So how do we alter these equations so that we can fast fall without affecting the distance? So we can fall quickly without affecting the distance that we are jumping and how long it takes to go across that jump. Well, when falling, to implement fast falling, it's pretty simple. We add a fall gravity, and then once your y velocity is less than 0, you're moving down. You just apply the fall gravity instead of regular gravity, and then you can add some sort of scaler. So say you want the gravity, 50% stronger or twice as strong. You can just adjust that value instead. But there is a problem though. Now our time until the peak jump is incorrect. If you adjust this fall gravity scalar, you fall faster than you rise up. So the time to the peak of your jump is now different. It's not halfway through the arc. So what can we do to change that? Well, we just go ahead and do a different calculation. This one that I've listed here. So this will maintain the time till the peak of your jump without without having you fall early or like you'll be able to make it all the way across. So now we have this nice jump movement, this nice way to define our jump and horizontal movement without having to actually tune physics values. So let's see what this might look like. So now it's nice, going through all the math and, seeing, it's like, oh yeah, you can tune these, but what does it look like in practice? So if we go here, I have a little visual here. This right here is, the jump arc for this player. So the green part is where the player is rising, and the red part is where the player is falling. So it just goes over, and then I have an arc for the double jump, and you can also slide. Say you double jump early, or you double jump late. This is a nice little tool, so you can zoom out a bit. A nice little tool, so you can see, how far the player can go, and if it's things in your game. So you design a level, you'll be able to easily see if it's doable or not. And then you can see here that I have these values, right? So this is the max jump height and the distance, the time to max speed, so the acceleration, and then the gravity scalar. So we can see here how this shapes a jump. So if we increase the jump height, you can see it goes up, but the distance stays the same. Now, because you can probably already tell that this will make the jump feel quite floaty because you don't travel very far horizontally, but you go very high vertically, right? And if you change the movement speed even more, it'll feel even more floaty because you have to travel that same distance in more time. And then here we can also see, if I bring this back down, height, here we go. This is also where you can see how the fall gravity scalar shapes the jump arc. So say I want the player to rise, and then at the end of their jump, they would want to fall very quickly. Well, if we do this, you can see, and if I jump, you'll see how the player will follow that arc, and they'll sort of, slam to the ground. Maybe not at this speed. If we up the player speed, you'll see. So they'll rise and then fall very, very quickly. And this way, you're able to easily see and design these sort of jumps. You'll be able to tell right away if the player is able to make this or not. If it'll even be close, and it lets you play around and find the game's feel a lot faster than having to tune physics values and having everything break and then not break, and having to go through and redesign all of those levels you've done previously. So next thing, so that's the majority of this. The next thing I wanted to talk about was camera movement. So back in here, we saw the camera is following the player. I'm just going to make the jump a little easier again. So the camera follows the player, and this is very common, very, very common in games. It is done, the camera goes to like a point, it'll change focus, it'll switch from the player to, say, you open a door and the camera pans over to it. And a common approach to this is to use linear interpolation. So you'll have a position that represents your object or where your camera is, and you'll have a position for the target. And then you pass in time.delta time. And the way it works is that when it's far away, it'll go fast, and as you approach, it slows. So it approaches very quickly, and as it gets closer, it slows down until it's almost stays still. This is while this is nice, there are some issues with it. The main problem being that it is frame rate dependent, or performance dependent. So say your time.delta time is varying. Well, then the way the camera will move, or the way this interpolation will play out, will be different. This may or may not have ramifications if you're doing things in like multiplayer. Say there's because your delta time might not just be slow because of or faster or slower because of your frame rate, but it could also be because of the performance of the game. Say the game starts chugging really, really hard. Well, you'll have a large delta time, and then this will act differently on different machines. Luckily, there is a way to make it better. We can use something called I call it exponential decay, but it allows you to you can pass in delta time, but the way it works is it uses half-life. So it'll decay over time, and it'll have the same effect, but it'll be consistent even when your delta time is not. So now what you do is you choose a larger decay value, and the larger it is, the faster it'll zoom in on the player, and the slower or the lower it is, the slower it'll follow its target. So we have an example of that here. If I go ahead and zoom out, and I have this decay value. If I make this really, really low, you'll see that the camera really lags behind the player as it follows around. Similar like how it would with LERP, but the benefit of this one is that it's frame rate independent. It does not depend on the delta time. And then, so if you go away and then if you adjust the value to be large, you can see it snaps more. And then as you go higher and higher, it might as well just be directly following the camera target. So this little one, this is just like a little one. It's very nice. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was camera shake. So camera shake is a nice little thing to add polish to your game. A little explosion or something hits the ground, you shake the camera a little, and it adds that nice bit of polish to it. Simple implementations usually choose a random position or to translate the camera in a random angle to rotate the camera at, and it kind of jitters around. And it's nice and easy to implement, but it's very jittery. I wouldn't say it doesn't look fantastic. And it doesn't feel fantastic, but it's better than nothing. The next small improvement you can make is to make it use Perlin noise. So this is nice because the values aren't truly random, or they're not as noisy as say random.value. This way, as time progresses, the random value you get will be similar to the one you got previously, and it changes more over time. So this gives the benefit, instead of having your camera jump around, it's almost like imagine like a real shaky cam. It doesn't just teleport from one position to the next. It slowly moves from one to the other, and the rotation is smooth as well. So it feels more rocky rather than jittery and jumpy. When you do this though, make sure to seed your sample differently per noise sample you do in the camera, because you don't want them to all to be in sync all the time. That doesn't really feel good. And then for dissipating the camera shake, sorry, I know this is just like a code dump here. I'm a fan of, the way I do it is I calculate the offset and rotation every frame, but then I have an intensity. So I don't set like a translation and shake intensity separately. You set a general intensity, and then you interpolate between the quote unquote camera shake position and the regular position. And what I like to do is I interpolate between them by the intensity squared. So that means if you have a very hard impact, say you pass a very high intensity, say like 0.8 out of 1, it'll really shake the camera. And then as it dissipates slowly, it'll be less and less. So it really makes those big hits impactful, and it makes it feel really, really nice. So adding it all combined, This is sort of all you need for a really nice screen shake. You get a nice you get a rotation that you sample with Perlin noise, so it rocks back and forth, or it rotates, rolls back and forth. And same thing with the shake; it moves around. Then you interpolate between your target, where the camera is actually, and it's the camera plus the offsets, and you interpolate by the intensity squared. Then you linearly decrement the intensity, and then this leads to some really nice screen shake. And I have an example for this too. Here, I got to get the player back up here. Let me just make the jump height really high. So if we go here to the screen shake, this is sort of how I have it set in the game. So you can kind of see that it rumbles, it's rumbling back and forth a bit, and it's translating a bit. And this is a very low intensity. It's at 0.08 out of 1. If we crank it all the way up, you'll see it gets more and more intense. Maybe a little too crazy. But if we let's look at one thing at a time here. So if you notice the rolling part of it, you'll see that it doesn't just teleport. It doesn't just jump from one orientation to the next. It does. It almost rolls to them. It goes from one side to the other, rather than jumping around. Which, yeah, like I said, doesn't feel good. Maybe makes you feel a bit nauseous. Similar with the translation. If we enable the translation, you can see that the camera pans around when we do this rather than jumping from one point to the next. And then when you combine them, it leads to a very nice screen shake effect. And you can adjust how intense you want it to be, how much you want how far away you want the camera to go, the angle you want the camera to roll at. But defining them in these values will make it nice and easy and get you a nice feeling camera shake for your game. And you can also adjust these parameters, per camera shake event you want it to happen. If you want something to really rotate the camera versus having something translate the camera, you can do that as well. And here's some additional resources that I love. So there's Frail Homer, that LERP, that small LERP bit I talked about. There's a 50-minute talk on deriving that. If you want to watch that, it's a good one. And then the building a better jump is the first part of this talk. Where they go, it takes about half an hour, and they go through deriving all of this again if you want. There's no code in that talk though; it's all math. And then the math for game programmers, juicing your camera with math, is also a great talk. All of the math for game programmer talks are really fantastic if you want to check those out. So yeah, that's what I have. Thank you.